little bit of stream going on here. Good old 4coder Friday stream. Alright, Let me get my chat set up over here. Hey Jim! Beast Wales! I'm not sure if I remember, I don't think you're a regular, but maybe I've seen your name before, I can't remember, but welcome. Okay. My chats are ready. And 4coder's up. Let's pull up the to-do list. So, since we last spoke, this to-do item has started. I have a get ranges to mark and mark them. Done. What we don't have yet is works on parentheses. Colors pulled from color palette. Optional modes off, mark braces or mark delimiters, and then we can do like cover ranges. Hey Doubter, welcome. This one I'm not doing, I'm done with that. iSearch upgrade with full parse and all that. We're not doing that this build. This one will happen. This one I'll do. This one's not happening this time. That one we can do. So another thing I want to do is right, we want to do the I bar and highlight mode. We have all the primitives we need to support that from the custom side now. We completely control what the cursor and mark look like. So basically, the core no longer renders the cursor automatically. The cursor is treated as an invisible marker, and so now you have to manually add a visible marker to it. But before all this, I mean, we can do works on parentheses, pull it from the color palette. But the cover ranges thing here isn't going to be possible right away. We're going to need to change some other stuff first. So in this mode, the other thing we want to look at is what are all the things that this isn't going to entail. This is going to change cursor navigation commands. It's going to change insert character commands. Let me try something. If I type, let me just get something with a, let me pull up a notepad, that's what I need. Foo, bar, copy, paste. Okay, so that does that doesn't pose a problem for me. Paste needs to be changed. There's no multiple cursors yet, but we have like, like if you see like, I guess I don't have any demonstration of it right now, but basically you can place your own highlight ranges, you can highlight a line, and that's all controlled from the custom side. So you now have the ability to, from the custom side, code up any kind of method you want for displaying the cursor and the mark. You can make your own cursors and marks that are extensions of what the core provides and display those however you want. You can write your commands to ignore the cursor and mark and use some other system completely for deciding what to edit if you want and where to put the view and all that. So, you know, in theory, like in potential, it has multiple cursors now. It just does not actually have them yet. But the customs, like anyone, not just me, anyone can use the custom layer to write multiple cursors now. We're going to write a single cursor version of that type of editing paradigm today. What are other things that change? There's navigation, insert. Oh, so backspace and delete do that now. Alright, we're in good shape. So, let's, alright, the other thing I need to do is before all of this, we have one standing thing, which is finalize visualizations API. So I have a note. Let me pull up my note to myself. I sent myself an email a few days back to make sure I remembered all the details I had floating around in my head back then. Okay. Where is this? Where is it? There's me. Okay. Let me grab all the stuff that I was thinking about and we'll bring it over here. And then I'll try to work through what I want to do with all this. Doubter, context saving and loading, don't have that yet. It's possible, it's just we don't have that built in yet. Can we printf rmain? Can we collapse code blocks? No, not yet. There's no potential for that. I mean, there's no direct, easy way to do that with the API yet. That'll be something that becomes possible in the new engine. It won't be really possible with this engine. What the best you could do would be to have a dummy buffer that you use for like display and receiving, for displaying and for receiving edits, and then you would have to patch those into the real text somehow, and that would be really hard. So I'm going to say it's not really supported correctly. Yeah, so some differences with 4coder is that with 4coder so Dowder points out with GDB there's this annoying thing where you set up your debug situation, you run it, you hit the crash, you look at what you need to do, you like find out some information and you go and do an experiment, and then you have to do all that GDB setup again to like get it back into a similar state. So I try as much as possible to put things in a configuration file now so that you can just type it into config and you won't set it up ever again. It'll just stay that way. But I understand there are some things that aren't going in config that you might want configurable, like I have you know, my views laid out in this particular way, or you know, something like this that isn't in config, that's a state that you set and then it stays that way for as long as 4coder's up. I intend I intend to eventually make a context type system, or like a program state serialized system. It's just that's like a big feature. I'm trying to these days avoid big features that will take a lot of time and don't affect the API at all. I want to get some final changes to the API in so that I can say, here's the alpha idea. Let me go and take a 6-month silence break while I rewrite the core in a couple of key ways to better support the API idea that I have, and then we'll start like going for that kind of stuff that's like, and in the meantime, since I have the API available that is as good as it can get, anyone else could go and write that thing too, and that's as good as I can do for now. Thoughts on shipping a build with ClangBat? You mean shipping a build where the build super calls Clang? CL? Is that what you're talking about? Or like the thing that automatically writes batch scripts, because you can configure what compiler the batch script is generated to use. Alright. So, the things I want to get in before this is done are, okay, basically all these things here. So there's a take rule. Well, I guess there's a couple of layers. First there's add and remove visualizations more than one on a single markers object. The next thing I want is, that's create and destroy. Then there's the take rule, the priority, yeah, to which? The build super or the generated batch script system, or both? I guess the answer is I'll be happy to do that eventually. It shouldn't be too hard to just type that sort of thing in yourself for now. So everything I add like that that's a maintenance thing becomes another duplication of the scripts that I don't really want to maintain, or it becomes like another complication of the scripts, trying to figure out how to maintain two side-by-side things, and so I'm just not volunteering to take that on. Right now, when I'm still in, the thing is, I don't really want to go into quality mode yet. I'm wrapping up alpha, but I'm still doing some explorative stuff here and there. And then we want to be able to iterate visualizations. Okay. View key. Alright. Okay. So, basically what's going on here, let me show you some things that I've become concerned about. Not implementations, take me to hooks, the render color is right here. So, there's a lot of annoying places where I end up making two separate managed objects. Like here's a managed object, here's a managed object. They're totally separate. They go onto the same buffer, into the same render scope, one for each, like one here, one there. Then the only reason they're separate is because they get different type, a different color, and they each have a different position, but there's no reason they actually need to be separate objects, and each separate object is kind of it's just annoying to have to create all these separate objects that, like, when the markers could be an array of 2 markers, and then we have 2 visualizations, one for each of the 2 markers in the array. So in a way I want to be able to attach multiple visualizations to a particular markers object and set like what I'm calling a take rule that says for this visualization, take these markers. Now that's not just a matter of being able to collapse some things down into a single object when they're different. There's also like for the matching enclosure highlight setup, I end up having 4 different colors, and so what happens is with those 4 colors, I need a different object for each of the 4 colors, and I have to do this really annoying thing where I get the ranges in order, and then I iterate them in a somewhat complicated way where you can see like I'm getting the range putter that's at ranges plus count minus 1 minus I, and then decreasing by 4 at a time, and then making the first one red that I do, and the second one green, and the next one blue. And this is 4 separate like arrays of markers that I'm building and then passing into a markers object, because I can't just keep them in order and have a take rule that lets me stride out the way I take each pair, right? So there's another reason is that there's like this whole thing where I have data that's already strided one way and I have to re-stride it into different buckets for each color type, even though it would be fairly easy to say let's make a sort of generic way to describe a take rule, and a take rule just says like, for this visualization, we're going to take these two, these two, these two, these two, these two, with this much stride between each one, or this x number, for however many y number of strides of length z or whatever, right? So that's what the take rule is designed to allow us to do, is do this as one object. There's another thing that happens with this system again, which is that right now I'm putting a marker here and here and making them both like single block markers. What I'd like them to do is I'd like them to actually highlight everything in this range as like all of those solid lines. So this is a type we don't have, is like ranged lines. And so I want to add that, but it also gave me the idea that sometimes what I'll probably want to do is be able to have two different visualizations at the same position. Like here, there's the line highlight setup. This adds another object that puts on the cursor position again, even though up on this path we already put something in with the cursor position. So now we have 2 different objects that have a single item to contain the cursor position because they have the different visualization. So sometimes it's not a matter of wanting to pack 2 different things together into the same object. Sometimes it's literally we have to use 2 separate objects at the same marker position because we want 2 different colorings. But for the purposes of markers, like that could be one marker that has 2 different color attachments and it gets rendered in both of those ways. But for like fixing time, what happens with a marker is at fixing time it gets moved around with the text it's on. So if the text gets inserted before it, it doesn't lose its position in the text. There's no reason to have like 10 of those when you only need 5, because you had to duplicate a bunch of them for different visualization effects on the same position, right? So the expensive part of adding markers isn't the rendering work usually, I don't think. It's the sorting. It's the sorting out the moving of the markers when you insert text. And so, in order to allow customizers to reuse marker positions for different visualizations without having to duplicate the positions, thus creating more work than is necessary, we need this ability to add multiple visualizations to a single buffer markers object. So with all of that in mind, the API I came up with over here, the idea is we want to be able to create and destroy these things and query them, and then all the things on them besides their most basic settings. The most basic settings I decided were their type, their color information, and the text style, which we're not actually supporting yet, but we might someday. So the actual look of the thing will be a part of the basic definition of the visualization. But then there would be these other, just realized, even though that should be you should be forced to set that stuff when you create a marker visualization, I think. You should also be able to change it later. And now I'm questioning whether or not you should have to do this, because why not just do it like this, you know? And then have you call that and then that. I mean, it's going to mean you do an extra call, which is also going to mean that if you ever have a code path that sets this thing and it doesn't care whether or not it's getting created first or not, it's always going to set it, then you don't have to deal with the fact that when you do create it, it like is annoying, right? That you have to put some garbage in at create time and then set it in a minute anyway. Now it won't have that annoying factor because you just always set it with the set look call. So anyways, the idea of this is these are different things, and it's possible that what type of parameters you can put on a visualization will change over time. And so I wanted to avoid having just a single struct that was like, here's all of the different things you can put onto a visualization, because if that struct changes, it is much harder to maintain API consistency. Because say you have a DLL that you compiled for your customization before I made that change, and then you have a different DLL that has some commands that you can load in from it, but those two DLLs disagree on the way that struct is formatted, that would be bad news. If I can't change the format of that struct, I can't expand the system at all, and if I do expand it, then I will create ABI incompatibilities between binaries. To avoid that, the plan is to instead not actually have types that ever are going to change, and to set different properties via calls, so that if you compiled some code and have these 4 calls in your code, the other code you connect to might have been built on a newer API that has access to a new call, but that won't make your code stop working. So, this is the API to build today. Flying Solomon, welcome. Cyber 18, welcome. Dowder, if you want to share a video, go ahead. I won't check it out right now, but I'm fine with you sharing it for other folks in the chat to check out. What's the connection between, or border between, what I've just described and runtime variable types? I'm not sure what you mean by runtime variable types. Explain what you mean by runtime variable types. Then I can try to answer that. Okay. So I'm going to just stub out this whole API first. Buffer markers on buffer. And right now I have this call set visualization or set visuals. This is a too oversimplified API. We're going to stub out this entire new version. Markers visualization, buffer markers, create marker visuals. Why don't I switch this to visuals? That's a shorter word. Visualization with visuals. Markers visuals with marker visuals. Visualization with visuals. There we go. API export marker visuals, buffer markers, create marker visuals, and that's going to take the app and the managed object, and that will return one of these if the object is in fact a buffer markers object. Let's see, what does Doubter have? I meant like a loose type system example, what scripting languages usually have. Okay, so the difference between what I'm talking about and a loose scripting type system is actually a bunch of differences. Um, this is first of all, um, so basically, with a loose type system, like you just put a variable set a variable and its type changes to the new thing you just set it to. This isn't changing type. This just has default values that you can't see. And so if I expand this API someday and you only wrote your code to know about these four things, I might expand it in some way that's like bool32, buffer, markers, um, set. Actually, that should be buffer marker. That should be marker visuals or something like that. These names are wrong. I need to change those. But if it was like marker visuals set, like kill time, right? If I add this in 4.1.1 and you didn't write your code for 4.1.1, your code doesn't break because I added this. It doesn't mean that the type itself has just become dynamic. The type is still a fixed thing, it's just the type has new members you didn't know about when you wrote your code, but your binaries will still work just as well because your binaries didn't say, hey, I need to go to index or like into member position 10. Like I don't need to go to the member offset because this API abstracts off the actual memory layout, but it doesn't change the idea that it's a single, like it's all of these types are fixed type during the duration of the program, right? So it's basically like when you create one of these objects, some internal thing gets created with all of these default values, and then some of those default values can be changed. It's nothing to do with being dynamic. You can't change the type of this thing by setting it to a different thing. It's always going to be a marker visuals object. It's just, it's possibly between versions that type will expand, but that type will always expand in such a way that old code doesn't break because of the expansion, because I'm using these wrappers to set things. Hey, young Lena, welcome. Exactly. It's a type that I'm saying I don't want to give you the type definition because if I give you in an API, you usually want to say once I've released this API, I haven't done this in 4coder, but usually when you release an API, you want to say I'm never changing that. That will always be something you can call that way if I do my job right. If I give you a struct, that is how you fill in all these things and just say clear it to 0 to default and then override, like fill in the parts you care about. Then you would be assuming that that part of the API would never change in such a way that your code breaks. But if I ever want to expand it, then I would be kind of screwed. So in order to allow expansions without breaking code, I hide the actual layout of the type and provide access to it with these setters. Okay, now we need to fix the names because create marker visuals is good. Destroy marker visuals is good, but this right here is more like marker visuals set look, marker visuals set rule, take rule, and so on. Okay, so now we have marker visuals set look. Look. Now I need to remember how I actually specify colors. I know I have like a type for it. Color. Int color, that's what it's called. Color, int color, text color, markers, marker text style, style, Okay, so there's set look. Marker visuals. Set take rule. Alright, no point in typing all this out again now that I'm past the part where I'm actually concerned about changing the type names, because I knew when I wrote this one that the type names might be wrong, but the rest of these I'm pretty sure I got all the type names to be real type names, so I can just copy paste. Once I have the set priority. Oh, there's something else we need to work on today, which is, if I go to my to-do, once we have all this working, I want to do better range handling. Range contained inside range. And then we want to do I just had a crazy thought. Interesting. I already have overlapping ranges handled correctly. The only thing that doesn't work is if you have a range if I have overlapping, that means there's one that starts, another one starts, the first one ends, the second one ends. That works. The most recently started one ends when it ends, and then it's done. The problem is that if I have first one starts, second one starts, second one ends, first one ends. I should do this in the other order for you guys, I think. Let me look at how the video looks. So let me start from this side. First one starts, second one ends, first one ends, right? That's the order. If the first one starts, and then the second one starts, then between that portion, we'll see the color of the first range. When the second one ends, between that range, we should see the color of the second range. Then first one ends, we should see in that range the first color again. Problem is, the way it's set up right now, when the second range ends, it ends all ranges. It doesn't have the concept that the more recently started thing could end, thus popping us back to the containing range. I wrote it in such a way that it just assumes that if the most recently started thing ends, then they're all done, and that's just wrong. And so I have not been sure how we were going to fix that, and then when I was describing it just now, I realized what we can do. Doubter asks, well, how do you handle it without additional information? The ranges thing? How would I handle the ranges thing without additional information? Two ideas. First of all, I already have IDs, so I could keep an ID and list all the objects that currently all the range objects that currently exist, and know which the most recent one for each priority level is, and then take the most recent one at the highest priority level all the time. But that isn't necessary, because we can just make a one-dimensional texture in CPU and paint that, have it cover the range from the first character on screen to the last character on screen, so that each pixel in our one-dimensional texture will represent the color that needs to go on that position, and then we'll color those ranges, and then sample from that to decide what to send to the GPU. Come on, you and me have worked on this kind of thing before, Doubter. You should be on top of this. Doubter, literally the last time we were talking was us working out how to do this kind of dynamic palette stuff. It's literally the same thing. The only difference is the only difference is now we're painting to it from ranges. Yes, Flying Salmon, you've described it succinctly. I have everything solved but the 1221 case. So the only difference here is I would be doing it on the CPU, but it's the same basic algorithm, right? I'm thinking it's not that many characters that fit on the screen at any time. I could pretty easily just say, before we render the text, this is an optimization problem. Why don't we just say, allocate a buffer that represents the background color of every character, fill that in, and then be done with all of this shit. I won't actually go that far right now, but in the new engine, when I say in the new engine, what I mean is when I have time to really optimize each thing to find out how much we can leverage the API, like, is visualizations a thing where I can push it so far that we can just have them everywhere and it isn't a problem, or is it like really the trade-offs say that we should try to be sparse with how we use them? But based on that idea, yeah, I think we can do a sort of dynamic color palette type thing where we build the color palette that tells us the background color for every character, and then we'll just paint ranges onto that in the order that we see them, and also with some kind of depth system using the priority levels. And then when we're done with that, we don't have to simultaneously render text and solve that problem at the same time. We'll solve that problem, and then the output texture will be the solution that is used in the actual render pass. Okay. Better range handling, range contained inside range, and then the other thing I wanted was range of line highlights. If we do a range of line highlights, then what we can do is say, put my cursor here, and then this line through this line gets one color, this line through this line gets one color, this line through this line gets one color, and so on. So we would get this sort of like tree of things going down to our particular branch. It doesn't give us the whole tree because it wouldn't also color this. We would just get this would all be colored with this in the current system. I could make it work without the cursor being involved, but we're going to put that off for now. Yeah, okay. So let's get back to filling out this API. I'm glad you were here, Doubter, because I think your presence was what sparked that solution in my head. I was kind of nervous, like I'm going to have to build some kind of complicated stack, but it's not even a stack because sometimes they close. Sometimes it goes 1, 2, open 1, close, open 1, open 2, close 1, close 2, and that's not a stack, but sometimes it is like a stack, and how will I even do this? And then I was talking to you, like I was talking to someone, who was it, Flying Solomon or someone asked about this, but you were in the chat, and I was like, yeah, we could think about like, oh, yeah, dynamic color palette would do it. Done. Okay. Marker visuals set priority. So we want to say that this is not implemented and return false, right? Because we're not implementing right now. Stop slowing down. Let's get this stubbed out. Marker visuals set view key. Yeah, well, when I upgrade the engine, I'm gonna go at it like a graphics programmer, and I'm going to like say, okay, we are sending this many characters to the GPU. How do I want to buffer that into like the smallest possible like vertex array, some kind of fragment shader we'll pull it from, and I just want to get like, I want to really actually go for it because I don't want to have any question that it's like, hey, I was trying to color every single line with an alternating thing and then put these markers on it to make this effect, and it like just tanked the performance. I just want it to be like, no, we went game engine quality on our text renderer, and so we no longer have to like lament the fact that the text renderer is just this sloppy piece of crap. We know how to push code, so let's do it. Let's do it in this case. Why not? That's why I'm excited to wrap up this alpha mode and get into beta mode. You know what? Today is such an interest. I need to put music on for me today. I can usually handle just hanging out, but today I'm gonna need some kind of music. Let me just pick the first thing that jumps out at me as interesting here. There we go. Doubter, I haven't spent a lot of time looking at the API of 4coder, but I'm curious as to have you thought about or already have in place an API that is granular and getting you control over the application. I'm not sure what you mean by that. Um, I mean, it doesn't. So basically, there's two different things I can mean when I say API. There's the sure, I'm listening to this. I'll just post a link of the video that I'm using. Glad that it worked so well, Doubter. I thought it was a neat idea. I was glad we spent so much time coming up with, um, you know, how to deal with that because it really does irk me whenever I sit down to make a text rendering system and have to think about like, okay, it's what 6 points per quad, and it's like how 4 components for color and 2 for screen position and 2 for UVs, and it's like, okay, so that's 8 times 4 bytes times 6 vertices per character. It's like, wow, it feels like it should be able to get down to like X, Y, an integer to tell you the color, and an integer to tell you the shape, and that's it. Like, it feels like it should get down to 16 bytes per glyph instead of 8 times 4, which is 32, times 6, which is almost, well, it's more than 100 bytes per glyph. It's like 180 or something. It's like a lot of bytes per glyph, and it's just like, wow. Okay. Okay, buffer markers, attached visuals, get attached visuals count. Alright, and then there's marker visuals, buffer markers, get attached visuals, partition part. Right, with fixed width fonts, texture, size, and size both disappear. But I feel like you could do better than that even with proportional fonts. I mean, again, it basically comes down to, can't you just make a texture with the size of each glyph and then pull it out from that? And send a single index that does both size coordinates in a single index into a fixed array of all glyphs, so that like you just send down like, this is glyph number 10, and if you have 2 10s in a row, that's fine, and they'll both go to the same position. I guess you need it in the vertex shader if you want to make it easy on yourself. That's true. Or yeah, something like that. I guess I remember the original plan was you send down an instance of one, like 00011011, and then you send down width height, which is not a bad plan. Yeah. XY width height. You wouldn't need to send down a separate UV width height. You could do texture position and then derive texture width height from the width height if you know the if instead you send a uniform that's the size of the texture in total. That's one thing you could still save. Oh, okay, we actually have all of these. Okay, so we've stubbed everything out. Let me switch over to types real quick. Marker take rule. Yeah, perfect. That's pretty cool. I mean, if you're doing this, you can go even further than that. If you're doing like monospace text and you always know it's monospaced and aligned to the monospace, like aligned to the width of the glyph grid, width and height, then what you can do is like you just say each glyph will get a different index, and you fill in a texture that's like, here's the texture that says like, here we send E, and then the next pixel over is N, the next pixel or texel in the texture is U, the next texel in the texture is M, and then you just send you have a shader that says when I render that texture to the screen, what it does is in the fragment shader it pulls out what's the position, like what's the character at this index, right? And then so like if you're on the pixel right here in the middle bar of the E, it first rounds its coordinates down to the smaller grid, finds out that it's an E, then goes to the relevant data to find out what the texel value is for an E at that position of the E, right, and puts it in. So we're going to rename this to marker visuals type. And then I just remembered I have another type I want to add to the system. In addition to all this stuff, I also want to have a couple of special enums for colors. So, one interesting thing is our colors have an alpha channel, which means if the alpha channel is 0, it always would mean the same thing. In particular, it would always mean that we just see transparency. But I'm actually not going to do that, because why would I have 2 of the 24 different color codes that all mean the same thing? I could allocate them off and put special meanings in up to 2 to the 24 different enums less than 01, like OX01 0000000, right? So uint32t marker visuals color symbolic color or something like that. So one of the things we'll do is I want to allow users to just pass any of the stags. So anything in this range, you pass it in and you just get that. Then I want to set some kind of point at which we'll say we don't expect to ever have this more than this many styles or colors in the palette. If I allocate half of it to that and half of it to this, that seems fair. So the largest possible value would be marker color wait, that's really kind of a problem I should think about. Okay, new plan. The problem I'm having is 0 already kind of has a special meaning internally, and I don't want to change that. So marker visuals or marker symbolic color or color marker symbolic color, I think. Default color equals 0. Then there's going to be marker symbolic color use stag color flag equals OX00800000. Yeah, that's what we can do. And then the others would go here. So symbolic color transparent would be 1. Okay, so Doubter, I understand your question. So when I'm designing this API, I'm trying to pick a boundary between the core and the custom layer. And so in that boundary, I don't try to put in all the levels of I'm trying to pick the most orthogonal, highest granularity possible, like most fine granularity, meaning most work for the user too, but the thing which has all of the options exposed, and then I try to build layers on top of that that say, like, here's a very common case of how you're going to use this, where you have to think about a lot, some of the settings a lot less, and I will transform whatever parameters you give to me into the full set of parameters that go to the API. And so, like for the lister, for instance, there's a UI API that's the boundary between the core and the custom side. There's the UI boundary. Then there's a layer built in the custom code that handles laying out the UI from a lister data structure, and then there's another layer around that that lets you build a lister data structure out of literally an array of strings. So it's like you have at your lowest level you can build any UI you want, but a lot of times you're just going to want a lister. So here's a thing that manages any type of lister. You just have to find a way to fill the lister data structure. And then here's, like, sometimes you just have a fixed array that you can get out of strings like that, like out of the command data, right? The command metadata is an array, and I just want to fill an array of strings copied from that array and pass that to this thing. I don't want to have to do this whole dynamic filling of a lister data structure either. So then there's a layer that's like submit an array of strings, and I will handle the lister data structure for you. So I build what I call the API is literally just the boundary layer between the boundary interface between core and custom, and then I try to add extra layers that are built entirely in the open source side, so that you have access to how did this layer get built. And that means that if there's a bug in any of the layers before the one that switches over to core, you'll be able to see the code for it. If your problem isn't a bug, but hey, I want a slightly different behavior than what's available, you can look at how this layer is constructed and drop down a layer and build your own version of the wrapper that you were using that has the feature you need, because you have all the code to do that too. So as much as possible, I try to give different layers of granularity, but when I'm talking about the API, I'm not talking about all of the things that are built in the custom layer. I'm talking about the boundary layer, the set of calls that form the boundary, because getting those super granular and orthogonal has the benefit that it makes it easy to build clean layers for things like what you're talking about. Alright, so when we submit these things now, we can use any of the style tags in this macro, and that will just combine it with that. And so now we, from the inside, can just check for this flag, and if we see a 0 here and then we see that flag there, we know that the rest of it, when we take out that flag, will be one of these tags, and we can just use that to get the color. If we see this number, we know what to do with it. If we see this number, we know what to do with it. And if we see anything else, we can just say that those are not supported symbolic constants yet. Okay. So now the API is stubbed out. I probably broke shit tons of stuff in the custom layer, so let's go and deal with all that. Alright, first we have some semicolons. marker visuals type. Actually, it's not good enough for me to just if0 that. I also have to take it out of the parse completely, because the parser won't know that it's under an if0. Visual or marker visuals type. Okay, it's not set visuals anymore. It's marker visuals equals buffer marker or create marker visuals app highlight marker visuals set look app visuals marker type color dot color marker visual symbolic marker symbolic color default color and then 0 and then marker visuals set view key app visuals view.viewID. Managed, okay, this is marker visuals type. Okay, yep, so here we want to do marker visuals, create marker visuals, marker handle, marker visuals set look app visuals marker type marker color marker visuals visuals marker symbolic color default color and 0 and then marker visuals set view key. No, I don't need to set the view key. That's right, because it's 0 this time. Visual. Okay, this is where things start to get like we don't need to have all this duplication in this part, but we're going to keep it for now because I don't want to change the API and the behavior at the same time. Create marker visuals on O. Marker visuals set look. Visuals type. Cursor color. Marker symbolic color default color. Yeah, I need to change those symbolic constants. They're not working with me. You're right. Um, I'm gonna just try symbolic color. I think that might be better. Also, glad you like the error markers. Whoops, don't need that sitting around. Buffer markers type. Whoops, guess I took one off I didn't need. You're right, the default color is redundant. It should be default. Duh. Thanks for the tip. I didn't catch that the first time I read your comment. Okay. So again, the set visuals is now getting expanded to create marker visuals, and then we set the look. And when we set the look, we want to set character I-bars, cursor color, symbolic color default, and then 0. It's unfortunate that that isn't moving with it. I think my markers should actually be right-leaning, not left-leaning, maybe is the problem with that there. I suppose that could have to do with the order of operations too. Like if you did that, well, if you're doing that and then that, it would never work. Yeah, so never mind. Yeah. Markers, set visuals. Okay, so what we need is we create the visuals and then we set the look on the visuals. So highlight ranges, highlight color, symbolic color default, 0. Alright. Again, we create the visuals and then we set them to line highlights, line color, default 0. Have I thought about implementing animated characters? I don't know what you mean, like glyphs that are animated. What do you I don't even know what an example of that is. Like an emote, or are we talking about like the S just deforms or something? I mean, if I had emotes, it wouldn't be that hard. I would just make it a sort of sprite-like thing, because if it was that, I wouldn't need to do the color blending. Text is weird because you color blend it in a way you don't do it with sprites. You treat text as monochromatic textures, and then you treat that as the alpha value, basically, for a solid color blend. Because whenever you render text, the way you should think about it is that the texture actually stores the alpha, and the colors that you go out to the screen are a solid color you set. I mean, I don't really have a way to say how I would approach that would be different from how everything else works. There's no, like, it would still it would still get laid out the same way. You just need to know its dimensions. If its dimensions are changing frame to frame, that would be interesting and complicated for a text editor where you try to cache the layout of text so that you don't have to deal with it changing. 4coder is well suited to making like a roguelike, an old-fashioned roguelike game, you know? I won't say it hasn't crossed my mind. In fact, I've thought about it intently at some time, on occasions. My two like crazy blue skies projects for 4coder are like, suppose one day I took like a year off of improving the features and built this thing inside of the 4coder system, where this thing is, you know, whatever interesting thing I choose. And the two biggest like ideas I've had are old school style roguelike, or like programming, like guided programming lessons that have like the left buffer is like instructions popping up to you with like expandable questions and things that you can interact with over here, and then over here it's you write some code and there's like a built-in, like it comes built in with the scripts that you need to build your code and run it, and other things like that that are just built into 4coder that it can into the 4coder extension. So those are two things I might do someday to just derive random fun out of the 4coder API. Character blocks, enclosure colors, default color 0. Yeah, it might not be helpful to people who actually need good programming lessons. I don't know. I just considered it when I was writing the Intro to C lessons. I considered, is writing a lesson really the most useful thing I could actually do? Oh, I agree. That's not even like a joke or an interesting demo. Having multi-edit, Google Doc style multi-edit stuff would be a cool thing to have in there. You know, very useful, in fact. Marker visuals type. Marker visuals type. Marker visuals type. Boom. Okay. So everything is now switched over to these new names. I still want to rename these buffer markers type is no longer correct. It's more like marker visuals type. And so these need to get changed. But and we don't really need an invisible type anymore, because if you wanted it to be invisible, you would just not create it. Or I guess if you wanted to make it become invisible but leave it there so you can add it back later without creating a new one, maybe there's an argument for leaving it in there for that kind of thing. I have a roguelike I've really for a long time wanted to make, so if I was going to do any of these, the one I think you should suspect would be the roguelike. Okay. So that's a good first step. Now what I want to do is I want to look at the API implementation, and we're going to get create, destroy, set look, and set view key all working, because those are all the ones that we actually have working right now. I read all of the stuff you said, Doubter. I just don't want to go down that. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole today. We're trying to get this thing out by the end of next weekend, so I have to avoid rabbit holing too hard. Let's see. So here's a question: should one of these visuals things, yeah, enum. Falcon Lover 8. It's basically a type def of the name to that type, and then an enum with a underscore at the end to disambiguate it from the actual name, right? I gave it a name. Technically, this wouldn't even be necessary for reals. You could take that out, but if you put it in, then debuggers can sometimes give you information in rare cases where it needs a name to do it. Hope that answers your question. Basically, the idea is it starts in enum, but first it takes the actual name and type defs it to the type. It kind of, for the most part, this ruins the way the debugger reports enum values to you, but I prefer it this way for a bunch of other reasons. Like type system doesn't complain at you. You can control the casting, the default casting behavior of your enum, all that stuff. The rest of these are all just this way because all this code here gets parsed, and like I wrote my own parser that parses it and dumps the documentation comments here. So like if I jump to view summary, that's the one I was looking for. Or if I jump to view summary, it shows me the struct, and it shows me all the fields and the documents for all the documentation for all the fields and all that. And if I come over here and I jump to view summary, all that stuff is listed here, the links, not sure why that link isn't showing up. That might have been recently added, I bet. But like, all this stuff has to get parsed out, and so to help the parser, I make it so that any file that has information that needs to get parsed out does this kind of stuff. Like I could just have it pull out struct, but then it might think that structs that are internal to 4coder also need to get pulled out if I'm not careful about which files I include in the parse. Yeah, exactly. And the cool thing about that is I could just say if I use lowercase struct and you don't see a doc string, then that's just a struct without documentation, but I have it report errors to me. So like this stuff here, when I build the website, it will say, hey, there was not a doc string on this exported type. Alright. So, should the visuals be another type of managed object? I feel like the answer is no. I don't want it to actually get passed through that system. I want the visuals. Should each visuals handle be unique? It's going to have to be, because if it's not unique, how does this call here, for instance, find it? So From that perspective, I think they should be managed objects. Alright, so I'm going to give it a standard header. What this really means is I shouldn't be using that. But no, I don't like that because this actually is just an implementation detail that it actually goes through this system. It's not, it doesn't actually participate in the fact that it has like memory attached to it that you can read and write and stuff. So no. Alright, so we have the look, which is everything with the text style that we're not actually supporting yet anyway, but I'll put it in. Okay, so anyways, we have the look. We have the take rule. We have the priority. And we have the key view ID. So those are the four like exposed things you can set that are sectioned off for now, and we have that. We can see which object we're actually from, so we know where to go for our info. The only question is, if an object gets destroyed, if this gets destroyed, we then have to free out all of its visuals, I guess. Which is frustrating. I mean, this object will, so for bulk clearing, how would we want to make this faster? We could just say that there's a certain number of visuals that can be attached to any buffer markers. And then allocate them with the buffer markers. No, but how would we make a universal ID system? Yeah. This reminds me of another thing I need to touch before we're done with today. Before we're done with this weekend at least. Clearing all dependent scopes. Don't delete them, just clear them. I think that's causing a problem. So, anyway, even if it's not causing a problem, I don't like it. So I guess, yeah, we're just going to have to manually free each one. Well, the other option is that we store the managed object ID there, and then... No, but then it just stays allocated forever. If I could make a bucket that all of these are going into together, I would feel better about it. I just don't see a good way to do that I would actually be happy with. I suppose what I could do is make a refrigerator for these in particular. I could give them a different system of IDs. Yeah, that's what we'll do. I guess we don't really need an array base, do we? The only thing we want to make sure we have is a good indexing system that lets us assign a unique ID to each of these. The only reason I don't like this is it's going to mess with our bulk free system. If I put a different marker visuals allocator into each managed scope, then when the object gets freed, it frees all of its stuff by just going one list move, bulk, we're all free. But how does it manage the fact? I would need a system of finding that from this. Aha, I know what to do. Yeah, I know what to do. Okay, so here's the system. We're going to have the ability to, we're going to need a couple of hash tables, or a hash table. We can take a pointer to one of these to its ID, so we need a way to take its ID back to a pointer to one of these things. and then we'll use a portion of its marker visual 64 bits. 32 of that will find us the workspace. And then we need the table that takes 32-bit IDs to pointers. Yeah, the U32 putter table. Okay, next, when we initialize this, in addition to these things, yeah, so in addition to these things, what we're going to want is a shoot, it isn't this simple. If I bulk free the entire workspace, I'm still going to have to free all that nonsense. And if it's all sitting out there without pointers to retrieve it, we have a problem. So the basic problem here is I have to find a way to bulk free, and right now they're all in these separate linked lists. I could bulk free a single linked list, but how do I bulk free all of the linked lists? So if the visuals have a next and a previous that threads all of them together, and they can be inside one of these threads, if they're all inside the free thread, they're all free. If they're all inside of an allocated like chain, I could move that whole chain in bulk into the free chain in one operation. But what's actually happening is they're in n different allocated chains. So basically what I could do, right, is have one single allocated chain, and then have all of the buffer markers contain pointers into that. That's going to make iteration quite complicated though, because now you have to check if you've just crossed, like if you're at last, then you break at the end of the loop is the only correct way to do it. You won't actually be correct if you break when you hit a null pointer. Okay, so I could either give up a little bit of my bulk free ability so that when you free an entire workspace, you just iterate the buffer marker objects and free each of their chains, or I can chain them all together and complicate the iteration process for a particular buffer marker object. Like if you have a particular marker object and you want to iterate its visuals, it's complicated. But if you want to have the ability to free one section or to free the whole thing, that all works. You can do a bulk free. You can do a free of a single marker visual. You can do a free of a marker and all the visuals attached to it, and you can do a free of all the visuals simultaneously. I feel like that's the way it has to work. Okay. Okay, so we just need to implement the two of those to get this thing started. Wait, bulk freeing won't be hard. Oh man, I overcomplicated this. I know how to do this. Yeah, bulk freeing the whole dynamic scope won't be hard. Alright, this is actually really easy. So All you do to initialize this thing is you clear it to 0. You don't have to free it. It automatically gets freed if you free the memory bank. Okay. Yeah, and then we'll just pull all that out of the memory bank. So this doesn't need a heap to init. Its init process is literally clear to 0. And then what we have to answer is, how do we actually allocate one of these things? It's a harder question. It's not even clear to me where that should go. Memory bank allocate. Where does that get called? Yeah, it gets called when we create one of these things. So here's what we want to do is create marker visuals. It's going to look like this. We're going to, first of all, like always, we get the command information, and then we're going to call so we have a managed object. Dynamic workspace, dynamic object, get workspace, models, dynamic object, I see. Okay, so we already have a way to get dynamic workspace from one of these things. Yeah, let's just do this. Okay, and then right here what we're doing is we're going workspace equals get dynamic workspace models. We're going to need to get the models pointer. From the object. If the workspace is non-zero, then we're almost where we need to be. We just need to call marker visuals allocator, or marker visuals alloc, and this will get allocated on. Then we need to set a couple of things here. We need to know the memory bank, so workspace mem bank. We need to know the heap that's on top of that memory bank. That's the models mem heap. And we need to know the visuals allocator, which is the workspace visuals allocator. So that'll give us our new marker visuals. Okay. I'm going to pause my music here and check the time. I have a feeling I should... Yeah, so we're almost at 2 hours. I'm going to say let's take a 10-minute break. I'm going to shut the stream down and come back in about 10 to keep this going. We're not going to rest until we get through a big chunk of this to-do list today because we don't want to put it all off till tomorrow. So we'll resume right here in about 10 minutes. Just want to make sure I take care of a few things before the day gets too far along. So see you in a minute. See you in a bit.